Welcome to WCG Talks Trials, the podcast where we dive deep into the world of clinical research, sharing the latest trends, insights, and best practices from experts across the industry. In each episode of WCG Talks Trials, we'll explore a different area of the clinical trial industry, while featuring a diverse range of clinical research and medical professionals. If you're passionate about advancing clinical research, improving patient outcomes, and driving healthcare forward, then WCG Talks Trials is the right podcast for you. We are so glad you could join us today.
Hello, everyone. I'm Sandy Smith, Senior Vice President, Clinical Solutions and Strategic Partnering at WCG. And I'm really excited to be your host for today's episode, discussing reasons to expand site cancer portfolios. Before we dive in, let me remind you to subscribe to our podcast and follow us on your favorite listening platforms like Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and Spotify, so you never miss an episode of WCG Talks Trials. We're joined today by Geoff Schick, Director of Strategic Site Partnerships at WCG. Thanks so much for joining us today, Geoff. Before we get started, we'd like to ask all of our guests, can you tell me how and why you got involved in research?
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to be here. So I started in healthcare, and I'm not a clinician by training or anywhere in my background, but I started in healthcare really as a process improvement specialist, looking at more efficient ways for hospitals and healthcare systems to deliver healthcare services and improve financial performance to the bottom line. And as one of my steps in my career path, I was lucky enough to take an opportunity at Loyola Cancer Center, Cardinal Bernardin Cancer Center at Loyola University of Chicago, as the administrator for hematology oncology. And at no point in the interview process, clinical trials research mentioned, but on day one of starting, it was, here's your parking pass, here's your keys to your office, and this stack of clinical trial agreements needs to be negotiated by the end of the month. And I said, what's a clinical trial? So it really was baptism by fire, but it was fascinating in terms of learning the aspects of clinical trials research, how it integrated with healthcare delivery at an academic medical setting, and then subsequently through the steps in my career through community-based healthcare systems. And somehow I've always gravitated back towards opportunities to be involved with organizations that are participating in clinical trials research.
Excellent. Thanks for that background. Well, showing up on day one and being given a stack of clinical trial agreements, I'm sure you got to understand clinical trials quite quickly and gaining a perspective too for how clinical trials impact clinical care. So my next question to you is, how does participation in clinical trials give physicians and their patients access to those latest investigational drugs, and how might this improve patient outcomes, particularly in oncology?
Yes, certainly. So it really is, it needs to be a strategy as part of both physicians' practice development as well as a healthcare organization's clinical care model in terms of integrating clinical trial opportunities into its offerings for potential patients and for patients that they're caring for. That inclusiveness of the discipline of clinical trials research will affect patient flow, will affect patient education, patient opportunities there, but can expand opportunities both for physician recruitment that brings greater talent into the organization, as well as kind of a retention or expansion of patients heading into the healthcare system for treatment options. Healthcare is still driven by physician-patient relationships, and that is a primary relationship. And so those patients who are choosing their physicians, especially their specialists, when they're undergoing cancer care, are going to be greatly guided by that physician's philosophy in terms of treatment options, including whether or not the individual chooses to engage in clinical trials research. And clinical trials can, as you said, offer earlier access to new treatments, new compounds, new therapies. But just as importantly, it can create opportunities to be exposed to new types of healthcare delivery that's not necessarily tied just to drug development. I mean, the expansion over the last 10 years of palliative care earlier in cancer patients' treatment courses has delivered far greater results for those patients in terms of their quality of life as well as outcomes, treating the entire patient and not just focusing on the regimen of drug delivery, et cetera there. So those types of learnings are just as important that come out of clinical trials research and not just the development of the potential next blockbuster drug.
Yeah, great point. So I'm going to probably go off in three different directions. We'll take one at a time. The first is looking at the patient-centered approach. So when you think about options for patients, particularly in the spirit of patient-centered care, how do you see that clinical trials weaves into offering patients alternative treatment options? And how is that also then being expanded to being inclusive and getting the representation of diverse patient populations, giving the opportunity to them?
Well, I see we're starting with the easy questions first, right? So how do we include more people and get patients involved? So nice to start off with easy ones. So patient-centered care obviously is a huge emphasis by healthcare systems, by physicians in terms of, again, patient satisfaction, patient retention, and again, all leading to greater outcomes as patients are engaged in their treatment process. And with the explosion of resources and information available on the internet, patients and patients' families are far more educated than in generations past in terms of coming into a physician's office, in terms of what their disease or their diagnosis potentially means, what some of the standard treatment options are. And so again, that physician needs to be able to engage with patients in terms of treatment options or care pathways that match with the lifestyle and the requirements of that patient's family and their lifestyle. So whether that's balancing treatment and care regimens in terms of their work life, if those that have to continue working and can't take substantial time off in order to receive treatment, or whether it's ensuring that individuals have a balance and able to not only receive treatment, but also take care of family members. They have extended responsibilities for that should take care of their own parents or have children. So all those aspects in terms of developing a care regimen that not only addresses the specific diagnosis and the options for direct treatment of the disease, but meshes into a patient and the patient's family's lifestyle, all are now, on the table in terms of open for consideration. And so those aspects also bleed over into clinical trials research and providing options and opportunities for patients to choose and to have a greater say in their course of treatment on their disease. Again, much of it is guided by the opinion of the treating physician, but increasingly, again, patients are coming in with advanced knowledge and having those options, including opportunities to participate in clinical research, which may be first-line therapy in some cases. I mean, the advancement in pediatric cancer care really happened because making clinical trials first-line treatment, it really has advanced the outcomes that come out of pediatric cancer care. But making that as well in adult populations and providing those opportunities for patients to consider clinical trials research as a first-line therapy. And if the trial isn't right for them, doesn't work for them, et cetera, you always have those opportunities to fall back on standard care. But making sure that those options are available to patients to choose and be engaged in their care pathways is, again, going to, one, create greater satisfaction and better retention by the healthcare system. And let's remember, healthcare delivery is a business as much as it is delivering care. But having that patient retention to be able to make sure that patients and families stay part of the system and can receive the care is important. And so that engagement level becomes important as a balancing point for the investment in clinical trials research, in more advanced technology, in additional programs through cancer care, such as nurse navigator programs, things like all of that feeds into, again, the totality of care and ideally leads to better patient outcomes, again, through that engagement.
Absolutely great point. So some of the themes that I've heard is patient care, patient-centered care, clinical research as a care option. And we often hear the phrase about integrating clinical care as well as research. I also heard another fundamental piece is the physician-patient relationship. And certainly we've seen data that physicians are generally the ones discussing clinical trials with patients. But let me ask a question that's sometimes a concern, and that is patient safety. How are patient safety issues kind of integrated into clinical trial participation?
It's a great question. And I think it's a huge challenge for physicians having that conversation with patients, especially the first time having a conversation around opportunities to participate in clinical trial research, as well as through healthcare organizations promoting their programs out there in terms of overcoming the historical mistakes that were made generations ago in terms of missteps on healthcare research and creating an environment where patients have that trust level around their physician and participating in research. There are multiple layers of protections in place before a study protocol ever comes to a physician to consider whether or not that physician would like to participate in it. That looks at study protocol design and safety levels in terms of whether or not the patient population can be protected. It also, again, is scrutinized by physicians that choose to participate in it, and then by an institutional review board that is specifically designed to review and ensure that patient safety and privacy is protected at all levels. So these layers that are in place are considered by some as in terms of an administrative burden, but a critical step in terms of protecting the patients that choose to consider participation and ensuring that at a minimum, we are doing no harm. And at best, we are providing opportunities that are clinically avoiding potentially adverse outcomes, as well as protecting the individuals in terms of their privacy and their personal health information, things like that, as you have multiple stakeholders engaged in the transmission of this information in order to collect the data necessary. So there is a lot of work in the industry to protect that. The challenge becomes overcoming that misnomer and educating potential patient populations around the value that can be derived from choosing to participate. And that continues to be a challenge at all levels.
Yeah. And it will always be an individual's choice and decision, clearly.
It should be. And should be.
So let's shift a little bit. Staying on the physician theme, I'd like to talk a little bit about kind of physicians' engagement. We know that those physicians that participate in clinical trials, they are involved in kind of cutting edge science. As we like to say, they're giving tomorrow's treatments today, but we're gathering the data as it moves more towards being considered for a standard of care. But how do we deal, or what are some of the concerns around potential biases or conflicts of interest when physicians are involved in clinical trials?
Sure. I mean, it's a great question. And again, there are certain safeguards that are in place or try to be put in place in terms of the study activation process, the IRB's review process, to ensure that at surface levels, participating clinicians do not have any pre-existing relationships that potentially lend to or contribute to bias or conflicts of interest from the start. But it always is important for healthcare organizations to have their own processes in place, again, to manage and understand their physician population in terms of the relationships their physicians have, in terms of their investments, their outside business relationships, the consulting that they may or may not do with various organizations, and ensure that those relationships are not potentially creating an environment that adversely affects a physician's judgment level or creates the appearance of affecting a physician's independent judgment level by having those relationships in place. So it is a concern, and it should be discussed between patients that are evaluating opportunities to participate in clinical trials with their physician in terms of it's included within the informed consent form, but having those questions in terms of why a physician or a physician's care team believes that a certain study is good for them, to ensure that that patient is comfortable, that the reasons and the motives for considering participation or enrollment of a patient jive with their feelings. They're not getting, kind of the adverse rent. But those pieces, again, have to be as much monitored and checked and managed by the physician's employer, whether it's a medical practice or a healthcare system, as much as it is on the research side. Those two pieces need to work together to support and ensure that the physicians are in the best environment possible with the best opportunities for patients to develop that trust level.
Absolutely. And I guess when you think about a community-based physician, obviously them accessing clinical trials and offering that as a care option to their patients is really part of good clinical care. But what other benefits do you see physicians obtain from their participation in clinical trials?
Sure. So it's kind of two levels. At the individual level, participation in clinical trials research provides an individual clinician, an individual physician, with an opportunity to expand his or her knowledge around where the science of the diseases he or she treats is going, to stay at the cutting edge in terms of scientific thought and helping to develop the next generation of treatment options. And again, not everything is going to work and be successful in terms of successful outcomes in clinical trials, but we learn just as much from the failures in terms of redeveloping, whether it's a compound or a treatment pathway based on the failures of certain clinical trials that don't have positive outcomes. But physicians that are engaged at that level can stay at the forefront of their practice and really have that confidence level that they are delivering, as you say, that cutting edge medicine from there. At a larger scale, an entire practice or physician population choosing to participate. And now we're really starting to move the science of healthcare forward. So a healthcare organization or a medical group that, whether it's single specialty or multi-specialty, that's encouraging and nurturing its physicians to participate in clinical trials research is really moving en masse the science of medicine forward through participation in clinical trials research. And again, individuals who choose to become physicians do it to treat patients, to improve the world we live in through healthcare delivery, keep people healthier, help treat diseases, help make breakthroughs from there. And getting a like-minded group of physicians together that recognizes the value in clinical trials research and chooses to invest in it, whether it's staff, whether it's their own time, whether it's developing processes and systems to conduct research efficiently, those type of organizations are going to help move that needle forward. That again continues to improve patient outcomes across all clinical areas, but especially in cancer care over the last 20, 40, 50 years is we've made incremental improvements, not only in survival rates, but also in quality of life, in socioeconomic benefits in terms of coming out of cancer care by having more efficient cancer care delivery models that don't impact patients as much. All of those incremental improvements have greatly moved forward the outcomes in terms of patients and patients' families that go through cancer care. And so those types of investments, whether it's at the individual physician level or the group level, are invaluable in terms of advancing science of medicine. And let's not kid ourselves. It is work to be a principal investigator and to be involved in conducting clinical trials research. And that is typically on top of all of the other requirements that physicians do in terms of patient care and administrative work and their continuing education they need to stay on top of the craft. Is an additional layer. Those that choose to do it, it's difficult, but it can be incredibly rewarding if they're supported through their organizations.
Yeah, and that brings me to that third area. We talked about patients, we talked about physicians. Let's talk now a little bit about hospitals. How do hospitals manage that balance between prioritizing their primary mission, which is providing outstanding and excellent patient care, along with prioritizing clinical trials research?
Yeah, big challenge. Big challenge. There are some organizations that's probably maybe on paper a little bit simpler because it's part of their mission. And then typically those will fall into the categories of academic medical centers or some of the larger integrated healthcare delivery systems that have developed a research or innovation philosophy and embedded it within its mission in terms of that becomes a kind of the core of what they do. And so keeping an eye over and keeping an aspect for opportunities to participate in research, whether it's clinical trials research or population health research or quote unquote big data research by contributing with others to allow for real world evidence research to be done based on actual patient care. Those aspects, kind of fit within their mission there. The next challenge becomes at the community healthcare setting level in terms of how to balance that investment, again, in whether it's time, whether it's money, whether it's staff, whether it's processes, in choosing to engage in clinical trials research. And it can be a little bit more of a challenge in terms of justifying it. There are a lot of opportunities to participate. Not all of them turn out financially strong on paper. Clinical trials should never lose money, but in reality, there are white spaces between enrollments where you can potentially have losses to an organization. So to balance that against the benefits to the organization of reputation, of expansion, of its catchment area in terms of patients choosing to come to that organization because of reputation, through the ability to attract new, more qualified or more prestigious physicians into its care areas, whether it's in primary care or subspecialties to treat certain patient populations. All of that falls into that mix in terms of the organization kind of looking at that balance of the investment in clinical trials research and what are they expecting to get back out of it. Because again, as I mentioned earlier, it is a challenge to operate at a healthcare level with nominal margins there in terms of balancing costs to make sure that individuals and the charge levels, if you will, and they are able to be managed so that the care can be delivered efficiently and financially responsibly within the organization and not to the detriment of patient populations they're trying to serve. And so these additional investments sometimes are looked at as extraneous or outside the mission, but that's really where the organizations have to look at that entire value equation in terms of what is their goal and their mission, and how does research complement or supplement that mission in terms of making them more effective as the organization that's serving their community.
Absolutely. We know that there have been rapid advancements in oncology. Many of the phase 1 trials now are referred to as early phase because they seem to go from early phase to late phase. And sometimes those trials have such great data, they progress quicker than was originally anticipated. We also have the accelerated drug approval process through the FDA. And we know that clinical trials care really is good care. We know that it's translating into survivors. I mean, early in my career, I remember when we talked about the millions of cancer survivors, it was single digits. Today, it's in excess of 18 million and growing. So we know that we're making progress. But I guess in my final question to you, I'll ask, as you look ahead, how do you see the landscape of clinical trials research evolving? And what advice would you give to healthcare organizations that are looking to expand their clinical trial portfolios?
Yeah, that's a great question. The hope and the dream is Gleevec, the next breakthrough drug that is going to make cancer disappear within a patient population. Those don't come around very often. But as just as important in terms of not only developing new treatments and new medicines for the care of those drugs is those other aspects of care that are improved through research as well. So again, we mentioned palliative care. We mentioned the development of targeted therapies and the investment in looking at all those different aspects. And so cancer care especially, but even healthcare broader, is going to continue to be driven by technology. It's going to continue to be driven through physicians and patient relationships from there. And so that question in terms of really looking to balance or find that next environment or that next equilibrium level for clinical trials research and how it fits into the healthcare ecosystem is a little bit up in the air. There's a lot of discussion over the last couple of years around completely different models for conducting research. You look at the talk over the past few years around virtual clinical trials, potentially taking patient visits that are in healthcare settings out of the equation to again, increase opportunities for people to participate from the comfort of their own home, if you will. That potentially has some promise. There's also the expansion and the development of patient-reported outcomes through wearable technology that, again, alleviates some of the needs for patients to be seen by clinicians in clinic or in hospital to collect data, but that can be regularly transmitted through smartphones or smartwatches, smart technology that's implanted within the human body that transmits information and can be captured. That technology is going to continue to drive opportunities at a certain level, but I believe, at least for the next couple of decades, we are still going to be in an environment where to really move clinical trials research forward, it's going to take a recognition and an investment by healthcare organizations and its physicians that this is an important and valuable piece of the healthcare delivery model. And those organizations that choose to embrace clinical research and develop environments that are research friendly for participating physicians are going to be at the forefront of that area. And that will lead into greater opportunities in terms of partnerships with collegial healthcare organizations. There are increasing relationships that are partnering on certain aspects of research, as well as, again, creating that environment for physicians to thrive that are balancing research opportunities with their clinical practices. In order to get research to really take that stride forward, we need to continue to see the investment from healthcare organizations in research. In order to do that, they're going to have to look at multiple and potentially non-traditional ways of expanding research. Again, so the physician-sponsor relationship has always been a strong methodology for finding the next clinical trial opportunity. previous participation in trials potentially leads to future opportunities, whether it's on the same drug that's in development or different drugs in development, because good performers in terms of the investigator or site level tend to lead into more opportunities. But for those that truly are looking to expand, sometimes you have to think outside the box. So that is potentially marketing yourself as your healthcare organization is a potentially research-friendly site and direct contact with sponsors, CROs, et cetera. Or increasingly in the last couple of years, we've seen the development of site networks pop up, which provides opportunities for investigators or healthcare organizations to tap into the expertise within a site network that leverages groups of sites into relationships with sponsors and CROs and can increase the funnel size, if you will, of potential study opportunities that come to that organization and can be evaluated by its investigators of whether they're right for that patient population within their community or that physician's practice to open. But those types of relationships are growing, and I think will continue to, again, because right now there is a finite number of physicians that are choosing to participate in research. What we need to do is grow that, because physician capacity is probably the greatest limiter right now in terms of how fast clinical trial research can go, followed shortly after that by expansion into patient populations. And that, again, was where the community healthcare setting is invaluable, where you get access into subpopulations within communities that can be contacted, that relationships can be developed with, that can potentially be introduced to opportunities within clinical research. But it really is going to take, I think, greater collaboration between organizations in order to move the needle in that aspect. I don't think we capitalized on the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, like we could have potentially with what research can deliver, which was potentially a missed opportunity. But there still is that opportunity out there for organizations that are willing to work together, again, to change that environment and change the acceptance level for physicians to participate, as well as for patients to be receptive to opportunities when presented.
Yes, great perspectives. So what I heard you say is being intentional about supporting clinical research. I heard you talk about innovative approaches, heard you talk about collaboration. We really do need to reinvent how we can address the great scientific advances we have coming forward and continue to see those numbers of cancer survivors grow. Well, Geoff, I want to thank you today for joining us, sharing your insights on this episode of WCG Talks Trials, and thank you to our listeners for tuning in. Before we go, I do want to alert you all to the release of WCG's annual Site Challenges report, which will be issued in October. Be on the lookout or for the report, visit WCGclinical.com in October, download your copy. It provides some incredible insights into the challenges sites face today. And just a little preview, the data looks very different than what we've seen over the past few years. And if you have any questions or would like more information about the topic we discussed today, please visit our website at WCGclinical.com. We hope you enjoyed this episode and that you'll join us for future episodes of WCG Talks Trials. Until next time.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of WCG Talks Trials. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast on your preferred listening platform as we continue to explore different areas of the clinical research industry. As always, we encourage you to join in the conversation. Feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions for future topics you'd like to hear on the show by visiting us at wcgclinical.com/podcast. We're here to serve as a trusted resource as we work to improve lives and accelerate clinical research together.